The morning my car disappeared, I thought it was a mistake. The kind of small, annoying error that happens in gated communities run by people who love clipboards more than common sense. By the end of that day, I realized it wasn't a mistake at all. It was deliberate, calculated, and meant to humiliate me into submission. I woke up at 6:12 a.m., already late for work, stepped outside with my coffee still too hot to drink, and stopped cold when I saw the empty space where my car had been parked for the past 3 years. No warning sticker, no notice on my door, just oil stains on the pavement and a folded piece of paper tucked under a rock like an insult. That was the moment I understood that someone in my neighborhood had decided I was a problem that needed to be removed. I lived in Brookstone Ridge, a planned suburban community with identical mailboxes, manicured lawns, and an HOA that loved to remind residents that compliance was not optional. I bought my townhouse after my divorce, downsized from a place I couldn't afford anymore, and rebuilt my life one routine at a time. Same parking spot every day, same schedule, same quiet existence that bothered no one. My car was registered, insured, and parked in the exact spot assigned to my unit, space B17, clearly marked in the HOA documents I had reviewed more times than I could count. That space was legally mine to use, paid for through monthly dues that had increased every single year without any noticeable improvement to the community. Yet somehow, overnight, my car had become a violation. The paper under the rock wasn't an official notice. It was a handwritten warning printed in thick black ink, telling me my vehicle had been towed due to non-compliance with community parking standards. No explanation, no reference number, just a phone number scribbled at the bottom. I stood there longer than I should have, feeling that familiar mix of confusion and anger that always comes right before something much worse. When I finally called the number, I learned my car was sitting in a private impound lot across town, accumulating storage fees by the hour. The tow alone cost $310. The daily storage fee was $85. The longer I waited, the more expensive my compliance would become. As I waited for my ride share, I noticed curtains shifting in nearby windows, neighbors watching, some curious, some satisfied. One person, though, wasn't hiding at all. She stood near the community mailbox cluster, arms crossed, sunglasses on despite the early hour, posture rigid with authority she didn't technically have but exercised anyway. Everyone in Brookstone Ridge knew her. The HOA vice president, the self-appointed enforcer, the woman who treated minor rule violations like federal crimes. Residents called her Karen behind her back, not because it was trendy, but because it fit perfectly. She had fined people for leaving trash bins out too long, cited elderly residents for having doormats that were the wrong shade of brown, and once threatened legal action over a wind chime. Seeing her there, watching my empty parking spot, something clicked into place. This wasn't about parking. It never was. Over the next few hours, as I scrambled to get to work and failed, I pulled up the HOA bylaws on my phone. Parking section, vehicle regulations, assigned spaces, towing procedures. Every rule required a written notice, a 24-hour grace period, and photographic documentation of the violation. None of that had happened. According to the rules they themselves wrote, the tow was illegal. That should have been reassuring. Instead, it made the situation feel more dangerous, because if someone was willing to ignore the rules entirely, it meant they believed they could get away with it. By noon, my phone was flooded with emails from my employer asking why I hadn't shown up. I worked in logistics management, a job that didn't tolerate last-minute absences. One missed shift turned into a disciplinary note. Two would become a performance issue. The tow wasn't just an inconvenience, it was already costing me money and credibility. Meanwhile, the HOA office remained silent. No return calls, no email responses, just automated replies confirming my message had been received. It was the kind of silence that felt intentional, designed to make me feel small and powerless. When I finally made it to the impound lot late that afternoon, the clerk showed me photos attached to the tow order, grainy images of my car parked exactly where it was supposed to be, taken from odd angles that cut off the space number painted on the curb. The tow authorization listed the HOA as the requesting party, signed electronically by the vice president. No violation code, no timestamp matching the required notice period, just a digital signature and a green light to remove my car. I paid the fees because I had no choice, watching my savings account dip lower than it had in years, and drove home with a mix of anger and something colder, something more focused. Back in Brookstone Ridge, the mood had shifted. Neighbors avoided eye contact. A few whispered as I passed. The story was already spreading, shaped and sharpened by someone who wanted me isolated. A car towed for violating HOA rules always carried an implication, even when it wasn't true. People assumed I had done something wrong. That assumption was the real weapon. By the time I reached my front door, I knew this wouldn't stop with one tow. This was a warning shot. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed the day over and over. The empty parking spot, the handwritten note, the impound receipt, the look of satisfaction on Karen's face. Most people, when faced with HOA harassment, either explode emotionally or fold quietly. I did neither. Instead, I started reviewing patterns. Complaints filed, fines issued, residents targeted. Karen's name appeared on nearly all of them. Always the same approach: selective enforcement, aggressive penalties, no paper trail unless it benefited her. That was when I remembered something most people in Brookstone Ridge didn't know, something Karen clearly didn't know either. 3 months earlier, after a break-in on the other side of the community, I had installed a dash camera in my car. Not a cheap one, a dual lens system with motion detection, night vision, and cloud backup. It recorded whenever the vehicle was approached, even when parked. If my car had been blocked, accessed, or tampered with before it was towed, that camera would have captured everything. And if Karen had done what I suspected she did, she hadn't just overstepped her authority. She had left evidence behind, quietly uploading itself while she assumed no one was watching. By the next morning, the anger had settled into something more useful. I stopped reacting and started preparing. I knew from experience that HOA conflicts weren't won through emotional appeals or confrontations in the parking lot. They were won with documentation, timing, and patience. Before leaving for work, I logged into the dash camera's cloud storage from my laptop, half expecting to find nothing and already rehearsing my next move if that were the case. What loaded on the screen made my pulse slow instead of spike, the kind of calm that comes when chaos suddenly becomes predictable. The footage timeline showed multiple motion-triggered events from the previous night, clustered between 1:40 a.m. and 2:15 a.m., long after most of the neighborhood had gone dark. I opened the first clip and watched my own car appear from two different angles, parked perfectly within the faded white lines of space B17. The night vision camera adjusted, and then a familiar figure stepped into frame. Even in infrared, her posture was unmistakable. She moved with certainty, not hesitation, like someone who believed rules bent around her will. She circled my car slowly, phone in hand, pausing to take pictures from angles that conveniently excluded the space number. She wasn't inspecting anything, she was staging evidence. A few minutes later, a second figure entered the frame, this one wearing a reflective vest with the logo of a private towing company. They didn't speak, but the body language said everything. She pointed, he nodded. She stepped back and watched. The next clip showed the tow truck reversing into position, blocking my car completely before attaching the cables. That detail mattered more than it seemed at first glance. According to HOA bylaws, even an illegally parked vehicle couldn't be towed if it was obstructed by another object without prior notice. The camera captured the entire sequence clearly, including the tow truck temporarily parking in a fire lane to maneuver into place. The footage didn't just show an improper tow, it documented multiple violations, each one stacking on top of the last like a bad bet doubling down. When the car was finally lifted and driven away, the camera caught Karen standing there for several seconds longer than necessary, arms folded, watching the empty space as if confirming a victory. I backed up the files twice, once to an external drive and once to a secure cloud folder. Then I did nothing. I went to work, I answered emails, I acted like someone who had been inconvenienced but defeated. That part was important. People like Karen thrived on reaction. They needed confrontation to justify escalation. Silence made them careless. By mid-afternoon, a notice appeared taped to my door, this time official looking, citing a parking violation that no longer existed because my car was back where it belonged. The date on the notice was wrong. The violation code referenced a rule that had been removed from the bylaws 2 years earlier. It was sloppy, rushed, and desperate. Over the next few days, the pressure increased. I received 2 warning emails from the HOA office, both vague and contradictory. One claimed my car had been towed due to improper registration, the other cited obstruction of emergency access. Neither matched the tow order from the impound lot. That inconsistency wasn't accidental, it was damage control. Someone realized the first explanation wouldn't hold and tried to replace it with another. Each new claim only widened the paper trail, turning a single illegal tow into a pattern of misrepresentation. Meanwhile, the dash camera continued to record. Karen passed my car several times a day, stopping just long enough to take pictures or jot notes. Once, she placed a measuring tape on the ground, photographing the distance between my bumper and the curb, even though assigned spaces didn't require such measurements. Every action was another data point. What made the situation worse for her was what she didn't know about my background. Before logistics, I had spent 6 years working in compliance auditing for a regional transportation firm. My job had been to find small procedural violations and trace them back to systemic failures. I knew how to build a case that didn't rely on opinions or emotions, only timestamps, policies, and contradictions. By the end of the week, I had organized a timeline that showed the tow request submitted before the violation notice was created, photos taken after the decision to tow had already been logged, and a towing company that had been used exclusively by the HOA vice president despite there being an approved vendor list. It wasn't just harassment, it was coordination. Neighbors started to notice the tension, even if they didn't understand its source. A few residents quietly asked if I was okay, careful not to be seen lingering too long. Others avoided me completely. The social pressure was subtle but effective, the kind that made people question whether fighting back was worth the cost. Karen, emboldened by the lack of open resistance, escalated again. This time, she blocked my car in physically, parking her oversized SUV inches behind my bumper, making it impossible to leave without risking damage. When I checked the camera footage later, it showed her adjusting the position multiple times, clearly aware of how close she was. She left it there for 6 hours, long enough to make sure I missed another important appointment. Still, I didn't react publicly. I documented, I saved, I cross-referenced. I requested official records from the HOA under state transparency laws, asking for all tow authorizations issued in the past 12 months. The request couldn't legally be ignored, and when the documents arrived, they revealed something even more damaging. My car was the only one towed without prior notice during that entire period. Every other tow had a complete file attached. Mine had gaps, edits, and metadata showing revisions made after the fact. Someone had tried to rewrite history and failed. By the time Karen made her next move, I was ready for it. She issued a formal fine for repeated violations, totaling $1,200, with a warning that continued noncompliance could result in legal action. The notice was slid under my door late at night, as if secrecy added legitimacy. What she didn't realize was that the dash camera had captured her doing it too, time-stamped and clear. The irony wasn't lost on me. Every attempt to intimidate had become another exhibit. The story she was telling the HOA board, the neighbors, and herself was collapsing under the weight of recorded reality. The final piece fell into place when I received an automated email from the towing company thanking me for my feedback on their recent service and attaching an invoice summary. The metadata showed the tow request had been labeled priority, a designation that required approval from an HOA officer and justification of an immediate safety hazard. No such hazard existed. By misusing that designation, Karen hadn't just violated HOA rules, she had potentially committed fraud. That was the moment I stopped preparing defensively and started preparing to expose everything. I knew that when this surfaced, it couldn't be partial. It had to be complete, undeniable, and public enough that it couldn't be buried by a closed-door meeting or a quiet settlement. Karen believed control came from acting in the shadows, from assuming no one would challenge her authority with facts. She had blocked my car, towed it, fined me, and tried to isolate me socially, all while assuming the narrative was hers to shape. What she didn't understand was that the camera she ignored was about to show everyone exactly how she had done it, frame by frame, with no room left for excuses. By the start of the third week, the situation had quietly shifted from a personal dispute into something much larger, though most people in Brookstone Ridge didn't realize it yet. Karen certainly didn't. From her perspective, the strategy was working. I had stopped calling the HOA office, I wasn't confronting her in the parking lot, I wasn't posting complaints in the community forum. Silence to someone like her looked exactly like surrender. That assumption made her careless in ways that no amount of anger ever could. She began moving faster, cutting corners, assuming authority she didn't actually possess because no one appeared to be challenging her. The first sign of overreach came when I received a certified letter informing me that my parking privileges were under review pending a compliance hearing. The hearing date was listed as the following Monday, less than 5 days away, and the letter referenced evidence that I had never been given access to. That alone violated both the HOA bylaws and state consumer protection regulations, which required residents to receive all documentation used against them at least 10 days in advance. Karen had either forgotten that rule or assumed it wouldn't matter. What she didn't realize was that the letter itself became another time-stamped artifact, another brick in a wall that was already standing tall enough to crush her story. Instead of responding emotionally, I forwarded the letter to a local legal aid clinic that specialized in housing disputes and HOA abuse. I didn't ask them to act yet. I asked them to review, to verify, to quietly confirm that what I was seeing wasn't just unfair, but actionable. Their response came back faster than I expected. The word they used wasn't problematic or concerning, it was egregious. That confirmation wasn't just reassuring, it clarified my next move. This wasn't a matter for private negotiation. This required exposure. At the same time, I began speaking to my neighbors, carefully and selectively. Not accusations, not rants, just facts. I showed 2 residents the footage of Karen blocking my car with her SUV, complete with timestamps and GPS data. I showed another the clip of her coordinating with the tow truck driver in the middle of the night. The reactions were subtle but powerful. Brows furrowed, phones pulled out, quiet replays of the footage. No one wanted to believe that someone entrusted with managing the community would behave that way, but the evidence didn't leave room for interpretation. It wasn't a misunderstanding, it was deliberate misuse of authority. Word spread the way it always does in places like Brookstone Ridge, not explosively, but steadily, moving from kitchen tables to text threads to whispered conversations near mailboxes. Karen noticed the change before she understood it. Neighbors who used to greet her warmly and now offered curt nods. A few stopped responding to her emails entirely. The authority she relied on had always been performative, sustained by the assumption that she was acting in everyone's best interest. Once that assumption cracked, everything else started to wobble. Her response was predictable. She doubled down. The HOA portal suddenly showed 3 new violation notices attached to my account, all uploaded within the same hour, each citing a different rule, none of which applied. One claimed my vehicle exceeded size limits that didn't exist. Another referenced overnight parking restrictions that only applied to guest spaces. The third cited a rule about vehicle maintenance, despite my car being fully operational and recently inspected. It was a scattershot approach, meant to overwhelm rather than convince. In doing so, she created a digital trail that clearly showed retaliatory behavior, something HOA boards were explicitly prohibited from engaging in under state law. What Karen didn't know was that the HOA board itself was starting to ask questions. Two board members requested access to the original tow authorization and supporting documentation. The files they received didn't match the versions Karen had referenced in her notices. Metadata showed edits made days after the tow occurred, including changes to violation codes and timestamps. When asked for clarification, Karen responded with vague explanations about clerical errors and system glitches. Those explanations might have worked if there had been one inconsistency. There were dozens. Meanwhile, I prepared the footage. Not just clips, but a full sequence stitched together in chronological order, showing the blocking, the staging of photos, the tow coordination, and the delivery of fines. Each clip included time, date, and location overlays, with no edits beyond trimming dead space. I included copies of the HOA bylaws on screen where relevant, highlighting the exact rules being violated in real time. This wasn't about drama, it was about undeniability. Anyone who watched it would see the same thing: authority being abused deliberately and repeatedly. The tipping point came when Karen made a mistake born entirely of confidence. She sent out a community-wide email announcing a new strict enforcement initiative, citing increased violations and claiming the board had authorized immediate towing for noncompliance. The email wasn't approved by the board. It wasn't reviewed by legal counsel. It wasn't even accurate. Several residents replied asking for clarification. Karen responded defensively, asserting her authority and warning against interference. Those replies, too, were archived automatically by the HOA system. I presented my materials calmly, methodically, without commentary or emotion. The footage played first, not snippets, not highlights, the entire sequence, uninterrupted, with timestamps visible the entire time. The room grew quiet in a way that felt heavy, the kind of silence that comes when people realize they are witnessing something they can't unsee. Karen blocking my car with her SUV, Karen taking staged photos, Karen standing beside the tow truck as it hooked my vehicle, Karen delivering notices late at night. Each action unfolded exactly as it had happened, stripped of explanation, leaving only behavior. No one interrupted. No one defended her. The evidence didn't need narration. Next came the documents, the bylaws, the tow policies, the state regulations governing HOA enforcement. Each violation was highlighted, cross-referenced with the corresponding footage and metadata. The management company's attorney leaned forward, asking for copies of specific clips. A board member requested clarification on the priority tow designation. Another asked why notices had been backdated. Karen attempted to interject several times, but her explanations contradicted the records on the screen. Every word she spoke made the situation worse, revealing how much of her authority had been assumed rather than granted. The turning point came when the towing company invoice was displayed alongside the authorization log. The discrepancy was undeniable. The tow had been requested before any violation was formally documented. That single fact reframed everything. This wasn't overzealous enforcement, it was premeditated misuse of power. The management company representative requested a brief recess, but the damage was already done. The board members conferred quietly, faces tight, aware that whatever decision they made next would define their credibility as much as Karen's behavior had defined hers. When the meeting resumed, the tone had shifted completely. Karen was informed that her enforcement authority was being suspended pending an external investigation. The words were measured, professional, but their meaning was unmistakable. Control had left her hands. The fines against me were nullified immediately. The towing fees were ordered reimbursed. The board voted to initiate a full audit of enforcement actions over the past 2 years. Karen didn't argue then. She sat still, jaw clenched, realizing too late that the room no longer belonged to her. The fallout was swift. Within a week, Karen resigned from the HOA, citing personal reasons. The management company terminated its contract with the towing provider and reported the irregularities to the State Consumer Protection Office. Several residents came forward with stories eerily similar to mine: fines issued without notice, threats of towing, selective enforcement that always seemed to target the same few households. What had felt like an isolated incident turned out to be a pattern, one that had gone unchallenged simply because no one had ever documented it properly. For me, the resolution wasn't just financial, though the reimbursement mattered. It was the restoration of normalcy. I parked my car in space B17 without anxiety. I left for work without checking for warning notices. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact now stopped to talk, some apologetic, others grateful. The social isolation Karen had tried to manufacture dissolved quickly once the truth was visible. Authority built on intimidation never survives exposure. The HOA implemented new oversight measures, requiring multiple approvals for enforcement actions and mandatory third-party review for any towing request. Security cameras were installed in common areas, not to police residents, but to ensure accountability. Ironically, the very tool Karen had ignored became the community's safeguard against future abuse. Transparency replaced fear, not because people suddenly became kinder, but because systems were finally designed to limit unchecked power. Looking back, what stayed with me wasn't the anger or the stress, but the clarity of how easily everyday authority can become dangerous when no one is watching. Karen didn't see herself as a villain. She believed rules existed to be wielded, not followed. She assumed compliance would come from intimidation and that no one would challenge her version of events. The only thing she hadn't accounted for was a small camera quietly recording the truth, while she acted with impunity. The security footage didn't just expose her actions. It exposed the fragility of control built on assumption rather than accountability. One car blocked, one tow ordered, one attempt to humiliate someone into silence. It all unraveled because the story she told herself didn't match the one recorded in reality. In the end, it wasn't confrontation or shouting that ended her reign. It was patience, documentation, and the simple decision to let facts speak louder than authority ever could.